மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Welcome to chapter 12. This is, of course, the final instructional chapter before you'll be off to work on the collections of studies organized by level at the end of this course. And in this chapter, we're going to be discussing the idea of mental agility. This is another phrase that I first saw in the classic book Imagination in Chess by Gaprindashvili. And to me, mental agility is basically the idea of remaining flexible in your thinking and your skill and your ability to come up with very unexpected ideas. Again, I think this is best explained with a couple of examples, so let's just dive right into it. This first one is very classic study by two brothers, Alex and Kirill Sarichev, and I really like the solution to this one. I think it's quite a lovely study. And this is white to play and draw. So white is playing for a draw here. If you would like to try and solve the study on your own, just take a quick crack at it yourself. You feel free to pause the video and do so, but for now, I'll just continue with the explanation. So when we first take a look at this position, it's kind of confusing because it seems like white can just immediately promote, but once we start taking a closer look, we see that c8 equals queen is not so great because black will play bishop to f5 check, and once black takes the queen on c8, if white takes the bishop, then of course black is left with this b pawn, black can play b5, and white's king is way too far away. White is lost. So promoting to a queen on the spot loses the game, and this is not a moment for under promotion because anyway, black will play bishop f5 check and take on c8. So white has to instead come up with something else. If white plays a move like king to d6, for example, then black will play bishop f5 anyway. And if white plays king e6, hoping to take the f5 square away, well then black simply plays the cool move king to e4. And once again, if white promotes, white is simply losing that piece to bishop f5 check, followed by bishop takes c8, and black has a winning endgame. White can also try to play king to d6 with the idea of hoping to put the king on b6, but this one simply isn't going to work. For example, bishop f5, the king can come around this way, but eventually black will be able to run white out of moves. For example, king to b6, black plays king to e4, and now there's nothing white can really do here. White has to make a move, black's king is going to be coming in soon, and if white tries to come in with king to a7, well, then black is just pushing b5 here, and after king to b8, the bishop will get out of the way, and sure, white can promote, but the bishop will simply take, king will take, and black's b-pawn will be running away. Once again, white is losing. So what can white do in the initial position? How can white possibly make a draw here? Well, once again, I'll give you guys a chance to pause the video and try to solve it. It's a pretty tricky solution, so if you manage to find it, I would say you should feel quite proud of yourself. Well, here white can start with the move king to c8. And this is a move that I think most players wouldn't even consider at first because it's such a counterintuitive move. We're blocking our own pawn, attacking the pawn on b7, and encouraging black to play b5, where the pawn is now just like running away. And it's really hard to see what white is doing here because black is just going to play bishop f5 and stop us from promoting, and then our b-pawn, the b-pawn is of course too far away. But things are not so clear, and this is where an experienced solver kind of develops this instinct to not give up on a solution just because it doesn't seem to be going so well. Well, true, if white plays a move like king to b7 here, then black will play bishop to f5, and here there really is nothing that white can do, as the b-pawn is just too far gone. But white has an incredible resource here, starting with the move king to d7. Now, it doesn't seem to make sense what white is doing. White just played king to c8, b5, and now back king to d7. So what is the point? At first glance, actually, it looks totally nonsensical. But once black pushes b4, now white goes king to d6. Now white is actually threatening to promote. If white had promoted on the last move, then once again, black would just play bishop f5 check, bishop takes c8, and white is losing. Instead, white plays king d6 and finally introduces the threat of promoting. And so what's the difference here? Because white could have just done this earlier. Of course, black plays bishop f5. Well, here white goes king e5. And now we might start to realize what white is up to here. The bishop is under attack, but the king is also heading towards black's b pawn, which earlier used to be on b7. But now that the pawn is advanced, white's king is actually able to go after the pawn. So what has happened in the last couple of moves is white has essentially provoked black's pawn forward. Something that you would never expect to do in this endgame, like provoke your opponent's pawns forward. But after king c8, b5, king back to d7, and now king to d6, well, now white is going after the pawn. Bishop f5 is forced, king to e5. And now black actually has no way of defending both the bishop and the pawn. So for example, if the bishop drops back, white plays king to d4, going after the pawn, and after b3, white plays king to c3, trying to win the pawn, and after bishop e6, white simply chucks the pawn forward, black is forced to take it, king takes b3, and white has achieved the draw. And just like that, there is no way for black to hold on to the pawn. So that was the magic of the construction. If we go back to the previous, the starting position, had white tried this idea of king d6 and king e5, this wouldn't really work because black puts the bishop on b7, defends the pawn, and there's nothing white can really do to make progress. But by compelling the pawn forward, all of a sudden black can no longer hold on to the pawn and defend against promotion. And after this just fantastic switchback, king c8 to king d7, it turns out that black has no way of winning this position. So black can try bishop f5 check, white will simply play king to d6, threatening to come here. Black pushes b4, white first plays king to e5, and then plans to track back towards the pawn. And yeah, there's simply nothing that black can do to win this one. King g4, white again just walks towards the pawn, and there's no way for the bishop to do both jobs, defending against c8 and defend the pawn on b3. So a really, really amazing solution, and it doesn't seem like the hardest problem at first. There's so few pieces on the board. But this idea of king c8 and king back to d7 is so logically counterintuitive that it's going to evade most players. And this is where I think the true benefit of solving studies really comes from, is once you see enough of these ideas and you solve enough of these problems, your brain really learns to adapt and to look for these very, very unexpected solutions. Because here it's like white just lost 2 whole moves, but is actually now drawing the game. I mean, truly just a fantastic concept overall. Our next example here shows another typical study where this idea of mental agility can be very, very helpful. Now, the study is far from typical, but I think the solution itself is quite instructive. This is white to play and win. This is a study from the great Henri Rank from 1928. And yeah, I would encourage you to pause the video and try to figure it out for yourself before reviewing the solution. So it's a weird material imbalance here. We have 3 pieces against the queen, but the rook on b4 is hanging, and black's queen possibly is going to have some checks in the position, or can pretty soon create some counterplay with a move like queen g3 or queen to g2. So it's pretty clear that white needs to do something quickly here. Now, if white tries to move rook to c4 check, for example, then black can take this one. And if white takes back, king takes c4, that is a drawn endgame. So this one isn't really working. Black can also consider the move king to d3, and there's no clear follow-up here for white. White can also try the move bishop to d2 check, but then black is forced to play king to d3. And once again, white has rook b3 check, but it's not clear where this is all going. Seems like the king can just start running away and escape from white's attack. So what can white do? Well, white also has this third option, rook to b3 check, which doesn't leave the king with a lot of squares. In fact, the king has no squares to go to, but does allow black to play queen takes b3. And if we just look at that for a quick second, it looks like, well, that doesn't work for white. Queen takes b3, knight takes b3, king takes b3. We only have a bishop left, and white doesn't win. And a lot of times we do this calculation so quickly that we almost like skip over the line, and we don't even fully consider the move rook to b3 check in the first place, even though we definitely should. Because after rook to b3, queen takes b3, we actually don't have to take back on b3 here. White has another move. And it's not the most difficult move to find. The hard part is knowing when to pause and look for an option. So as it turns out here, after queen takes b3, white can throw in bishop to d2 check, and all of a sudden black's king has to leave the defense of the queen on b3, either king d3 or king to d4, and then white can take on b3 for free and leave ourselves with 2 minor pieces versus the king, and again, a winning endgame. So that's the solution here. We start with rook to b3 check, queen takes b3 only move, and then bishop d2, the key resource here to force black's king off of the queen, and we end up taking on b3 with 2 extra pieces at the end. So this move is very, very difficult to find when you're just trying to solve the study at first, because of course our brains naturally are drawn to the automatic recaptures. And this is again where the skill of mental agility I think is really, really important. There's lots of situations, and as you'll see in the upcoming puzzles, lots of studies where an automatic recapture might not be the best move. So this is where you're really going to have to train yourself to not make moves too quick in your analysis. It's really easy to just discard the move rook to b3 check because it looks like black's queen can take. So the skill is learning to slow down and look for options on every single move. So that'll be my main tip for you as you solve the rest of the puzzles in this chapter. Really try to slow down as you're analyzing. This is not about calculating quickly, but actually calculating thoroughly and accurately. So really try to slow down and don't dismiss moves too quickly. A lot of times studies and composers, they like to make the solutions as counterintuitive as possible, as unexpected as possible in terms of aesthetic value. And so you have to keep this in mind and make sure that you're not dismissing moves too easily, as you might be overlooking the solution. Let's take a look at one more example to really show you the types of puzzles you should expect throughout this chapter. Here, this is white to play and win. And I'll give you a chance now to pause the video and try to solve it for yourself in full. Really make sure to spend a couple of minutes on it before coming back to review the solution. Okay, assuming you paused the video and are ready to take a look, here white wins with a pretty direct combination to start. Rook takes e7 as kind of the main candidate move in the position. But after rook takes e7, rook takes e7, bishop c8 check, rook b7, here it's very, very important that white finds the right move. Of course, white is in check here, so we're not allowed to play c6. I think when we're calculating, it's very easy to assume that the move is bishop takes b7, in which case black would simply just play king takes b7 and make an easy draw, as black's king can just sit in front of the pawn and use the a-pawn as a decoy if needed. So this doesn't work for white, but instead, after rook to b7 check, it's very important that white sidesteps this rook with the move king to c4, putting black in a very unfortunate zugzwang. And this is another thing that really, I think, improves when you work on these puzzles and you work on your mental agility, is the ability to spot these kinds of this kind of zugzwang position. Where black has no moves, the king has to play to a5, and white will be able to win the rook and keep the light squared bishop. I should note here that king a4 would not work, as black would actually be in stalemate, no legal moves, and king c3 would not be as good, as black can play king to b5 here and then win white's last pawn. So king c4 is the very accurate finish. And once again, very easy for someone to be calculating this variation. Quickly notice rook takes e7, rook takes e7, bishop c8 check, rook to b7, and then it's very easy for our brain to automatically play bishop takes b7 in our visualization. But very, very important to kind of unlearn this habit and learn to look for options, even and especially when it seems like you have some kind of move that's forced. So that would be one of the main takeaways I would leave you with. If you notice that a move seems forced but isn't actually 100% forced, hopefully that acts as a trigger to stop right at that moment and consider your options, because chances are you might have a less obvious move that actually turns out to be a lot stronger. So that's kind of the key here. Try to slow down as you're calculating, and you'll be able to notice when you have a kind of quiet, slow move to really end the solution on a high note and end up winning the game. So with that, I'll leave you to it to solve the rest of the puzzles in this chapter. Definitely make sure to spend as much time as you need for these puzzles, and do make sure to review the solution after going through each exercise, so I think this is really where you can learn the most. And with that, I'll be wishing you the best of luck, and I'll be seeing you in the next chapter. Take care.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. தேங்க்யூ.